Hello, everyone, and welcome to our WISE special series, Retirement Reimagined. Today, we're going to talk about setting up an optimal portfolio to have the retirement of your dream. We have a lot going on here, very special guest, but first, just a minute about WISE's origin story. In 1997, a group of very determined women met to put on an investment conference for women. They had no idea what to expect, and they were thrilled, overwhelmed when 500 signed up. They knew they were onto something. Fast forward, almost 3 decades later, and WISE has a much bigger footprint. We are a national award-winning organization, but we have remained true to our original mission of financial empowerment education for females of all ages and all backgrounds. We believe if you manage your money better, you're going to have more opportunities, more options in life, and very importantly, financial security. Now and in retirement, which is a perfect segue to our wonderful guest tonight, and that is Christine Benz. Christine is the longtime director at Morningstar of Personal Finance and Retirement Planning. She's one of the most respected voices in both personal finance and retirement planning in this country. We are so fortunate to have Christine with us tonight. But she's also an author of many books, including her most recent book, How to Retire, 20 Lessons for a Happy, Successful, and Wealthy Retirement. It's a fabulous book. I've read it. I recommend it to everyone listening here. So we have lots to cover, but just a word of caution that we always put, as with all of our webinars, this is for informational and educational purposes only. Before you make any changes to your portfolio, consult with your trusted advisors and put your questions, which we'll take at the end in the Q&A box, not the chat box. And with that, Christine, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Angela, thank you so much, and thanks to everyone for being here tonight. It's just always an honor and a privilege to speak with you. Thank you so much.
Well, you're very special to us, Christine, so thank you. So last time Christine was with us, we talked about the non-financial aspects of retirement, how to have a happy, productive retirement that brings you joy. Now we're going to talk about setting up a portfolio so you can do that. You can get there. So many investors have this idea that there's a special number for retirement. In fact, there's a survey that's recently come out that puts this number at 1.5 million, which is causing a lot of anxiety out there. Christine, what do you want people to know about this? Is there a special number, or is it just different for everyone?
It's definitely different for everyone, Angela, and it comes down to what you think your spending will look like in retirement. That will determine how much you'll need to have to support you in retirement. And of course, you'd want to be looking at your non-portfolio sources of income as well. So Social Security, if you're one of the dwindling share among us who has some type of a pension coming to her, you would use that to augment what you'd be able to spend from your portfolio. But that's really the starting point, is to spend some time looking at your budget. Even if you've been someone who, like me, you really haven't had a budget, but you've had more of a savings target, and then you've just kind of let the chips fall where they may in terms of your household spending. As retirement gets closer, it's helpful to get your arms around specifically your fixed spending amount, how, the non-negotiables like your utilities, your housing costs, your food costs, your insurance costs, and then your discretionary items, and have those two buckets in mind as you're thinking about your household spending. And then you can use that to determine if you have enough, and the 4% guideline, and we can talk about that as kind of a quick and dirty rule of thumb where you're taking 4% of your portfolio. Let's say it's $1 million, that's $40,000 a year. Is that enough for me to live on in addition to what I might have from Social Security? And then with that annual spending amount, you can also begin to kind of structure the portfolio based on your anticipated spending. So I'm a big believer in what's called the bucket approach to retirement portfolio spending, and we can talk about the specifics of that. But the starting point is getting your arms around your spending, because without that, it's impossible to determine whether you actually have enough or not.
and what you can cut back. I know that I've heard some friends, financial planners, say that's one of the hardest things to get people to write down is all of their spending. And we're spending much more than we think on different things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And with inflation too. So my husband and I have been in the process of trying to do this more granular tracking of our spending. And I've just been putting receipts on his desk, sort of like submitted without comment some of the time. But it's been an interesting process. I will say that, you know, this idea of having the reverse budget where you just set your savings target. And as long as you hit that, you don't worry too much about the spending on an ongoing basis. I feel like it's a really great strategy because you're not getting bogged down. But as you get closer to retirement, I do think it's helpful to be a little bit more specific.
Yeah, I once heard the advice that just save as much as you can as you're, it doesn't have to be a certain target, just as much as you can, and it'll work out. So one of the things that you talk about a lot, which really resonates, I think, with all of us that have been involved in finance for many years, is the simplicity. Because there's such a alphabet soup of different strategies, mutual funds, ETFs, REITs, target date funds, and so how do you get to simplicity? Which is just overwhelming.
It is. It can be very clarifying too, where you are trying to have the basic building blocks in place and be very scrupulous about not having clutter in your portfolio. I think a way to think about it is the way we all, not the way that we all, but the way that many of us like to run our households, where I don't know about you, but I love a clutter-free space, a workspace, home space. It helps me think better. And the same is true with your portfolio. The fewer moving parts, the easier it is to get your arms around the things that really matter, like your savings rate, like your spending rate if you're retired, like your baseline asset allocation. So I do think it comes down to having those core building blocks in place. I've created what I call some minimalist portfolio examples. They're not necessarily the right fit for everyone, but they're there to be illustrative of how simple a portfolio can be. So for accumulators, it might be as simple as the target date fund in your 401k plan. Most of those are pretty decent. They have low costs. Many of them consist of index funds, which are just tracking market segments at very low expense ratios. So that's the easy button. But if you want to move a step beyond that and have a little bit more control over your portfolio's asset allocation, you could use simple index funds where you have maybe a total US market index, a total non-US or international index. And then as you age and you move over, say, age 50, I would think about having more safety in that portfolio. So then I'm bringing in a bit of a total bond market index, perhaps. And then as I get closer to retirement, I might want to have a little bit more granularity in that safe allocation. So in addition to a total bond market index, maybe a little bit in short-term bonds, maybe some dedicated cash holdings within my portfolio. And I would also bring some Treasury inflation protected securities on board. And these are bonds that have a very nice feature that help adjust the payments that you receive from them upward to keep pace with inflation. Because bonds, even though we like the stability that they bring to our portfolios, because they are going to pay that fixed rate of interest, if our purchasing power is being eroded by inflation, those interest rate payments that we're getting from the bonds, from nominal bonds, is just going to be gobbled up by inflation. And so that's where Treasury inflation protected securities can come into play, especially for older adults. But it really does not have to be complicated. I love that you're homing in on the message of how simple it can be.
So, people will have a retirement portfolio, hopefully with their employer, but there are also other ways, right? You can set up your own retirement port. It's just a little different. So so you just stick with that same plan, keep it simple, and things like these inflation index tips, right? It's inflation index.
Right.
How do you buy those? I mean, because you've talked about this before, but is that a fund? Do you go get them from the government? How do you add these to your portfolio?
Great question, Angela. So you can buy them directly from Treasury Direct. So you can buy individual Treasury inflation protected securities. And you can even build, say you're getting close to retirement, you can build what's called a ladder of these bonds with, say, I'm thinking I'll be retired for like 30 years. You could have one of these bonds maturing in each year. That gets a little cumbersome and difficult to manage, though, I think, for most individual investors. So you can buy a fund that in turn invests in Treasury inflation protected securities. So you can buy one that invests in shorter dated Treasury inflation protected securities, or one that might invest in intermediate term or longer dated ones. But even though that's not quite as elegant of a solution to address your retirement spending needs, it does help simplify things a lot. And then I should also mention there are what are called I bonds, which are similar to Treasury inflation protected securities. You can also buy those directly from the Treasury. The issue with I bonds is that you are limited in terms of how much you can buy. So I believe it's $10,000 per taxpayer per year. So for larger investors, that limitation can curb how much you can put into it. You may not be able to buy enough inflation protection with I bonds alone.
So I've heard others talk about those inflation index bonds very favorably. So thank you for that clarification. Sounds like a fund is probably the easiest thing to do.
It is. It's not perfect in terms of, some people really like to get quite
Yeah.
specific about this, where they're saying, my spending is this, so I want to make sure that I've perfectly calibrated my tips
Yeah.
payments to meet it. But I'm not sure that everyone needs to put that fine a point on it. I don't think I will when my retirement
So,
hits.
started talking a little bit about the structure of the portfolio and how conservative. So we used to hear a lot about this 60-40 rule, right? 60% equities, 40% bonds. So do you think that's still a valid concept? And then it starts reversing as you get older? Or how do we know that we don't get too conservative with our portfolio? Is there some way to protect us from being too cautious?
Yeah, it's a good question. And here I would go back to that point I made about knowing what your spending is.
Mm.
And then I think you can create what's called a bucket type portfolio. So 60-40 is fine, but for most people, I think you'd want to be a little bit more specific in terms of your asset allocation. So going back to that, say I'm spending 4% of my portfolio in retirement, or I think roughly that's how much I'll be spending, and I have $1 million portfolio. The idea is that I'm then structuring that portfolio to support my spending. So I might have a like 1 to 2 years worth of my portfolio expenditures set aside in cash instruments. So in money market funds, in CDs, in some sort of a high yield savings account. I'm not taking any risk with that portion of my portfolio because I don't want to jeopardize my spending in those first couple of years of retirement. I'm just setting aside, in this case, if I'm setting aside 2 years worth of spending, that's $80,000 in cash. And then from there, I'm just stepping out on the risk spectrum a little bit. So I'd think about having another, say, 5 to 8 years worth of portfolio spending in some sort of a high quality bond portfolio. And that would encompass the Treasury inflation protected securities that we talked about. It might include some short term bonds, some intermediate term bonds. And here I think mutual funds would be just fine. And so you had another 5 to 8 years worth of portfolio spending. So if it's $40,000 a year, anything from 200,000 additionally to if it's 8 years, 320,000. And so with those two pieces, I've got 7 to 10 years worth of portfolio spending set aside in safer assets. And then the rest of the portfolio, well, that's where I can take some risk because I know that the market stocks could go down and stay down for 7 to 10 years, but I'm still okay because I can spend from those safer assets. And then the market should have recovered. It would be a really unlikely extended downdraft where my stocks would still be in a downturn after I had spent through the safer assets. So I think that's a nice intuitive framework to help people back into what their anticipated spending might be. A key thing to keep in mind, though, is that Social Security will come into play at some point. And I know we're going to talk about that, Angela, but that will cause your spending to not be totally linear. It's not, probably not that you will spend the same amount year after year. Your early retirement withdrawals may indeed be higher because Social Security hasn't yet come online for you. So you'd want to factor that in as well, that it's not probably for most of us going to be strictly linear spending from our portfolios throughout our whole retirement time horizon. We'll probably, many of us, be spending more earlier because of Social Security and because of sort of those lifestyle considerations that a lot of people have pent up demand in the early years of retirement.
So, I'm glad we can talk about this Social Security. Why you brought it up. So let's talk about this. So now talk about complexity.
Yes.
That is so complicated. We've talked to, I know you're a friend of Mary Beth Franklin. I mean,
She's the best.
She's the best. Your head spins when you hear her talking about Social Security. So can you simplify this a bit for our audience, like in terms of claiming strategies? What are mistakes that you think people make in terms of actually collecting Social Security?
Well, the big one is claiming at 62 when you're first eligible. And sometimes it's the only answer if someone doesn't have any other source of funds, or maybe they have a health condition that leads them to believe that their life expectancy is shortened. That can be a perfectly legitimate thing to do to claim early. But for many people who have average or longer than average life expectancy, and women on average, it's, at 65, we have a couple of years of extra life expectancy relative to males anyway. So for single women, delaying filing is often the right call, but I get that some people just want, if they've retired, they want some funds coming in the door. So that's why I think some people gravitate to, I'm just going to take my money now and not delay. But the big benefit of delaying, if you possibly can, is that you pick up an increase in your benefit for every year that you're able to delay all the way up until age 70. So for single women, if they can afford to delay, they should, as long as they possibly can, up until age 70. And then married couples, I think, should approach Social Security filing as a couple where you're making decisions with an eye toward enlarging lifetime benefits for both of you. So for married couples, that's often going to come down to the higher earner delaying filing, especially if the partner will be reliant on his or her benefit when the first partner, the higher earning partner, dies. It's super important to delay for that higher earning partner, because for the surviving spouse, the benefit that he or she will receive will depend on whatever that higher earning partner's benefit was.
Yeah, no, it is really complicated, all of these, and I know that also the laws shift, so we all have to stay on top of all of this. What
They
about?
do. Angela, I wanted to
Yeah,
mention one
yeah,
thing,
yeah.
because in the realm of misconceptions or mistakes, one thing I do hear a lot, even among older adults or people who are my age, older adults, I guess, is that people are worried that there will be wholesale changes to the program that will
Right.
affect their promised benefits. And I think that's one of the reasons that people jump on filing earlier. But to me, I think people should be aware that Social Security is such a popular program in this country among blue states, red states, rich people, poor people. Everyone likes the program. And politicians are aware of that. And they do need to make some hard decisions, maybe some incremental adjustments to change the program to shore up its finances. But for people, certainly those over 60, even those I would say over 50, never say never, the idea that there would be wholesale changes that will affect your promised benefits, I don't know. To me, it seems really unlikely. If I'm in my 30s, 40s, especially if I'm a higher earning worker, I probably do want to maybe give my promised benefits a little bit of a haircut to account for potential changes to the program. I don't know what shape they might take, but for people who are hurtling toward retirement within 10 years of retirement or whatever, I don't think that they should certainly claim early in anticipation of, I'm going to get my funds now because things could really change eventually. I just don't think that's realistic.
Realistic. Yeah, I mean, you read about that, it's only going to be till 2030, and then they're going to start reducing benefits and all of that. But yeah, it is too popular a program. Absolutely. So, what about the idea of any strategies that people should think of in terms of minimizing their taxes? So, before they have to take the dreaded required minimum distribution and
Right.
bump up your taxes, is there anything that people can do with their portfolios to try to minimize that?
Well, one thing to think about is in your peak earnings years, that's often when people gravitate to Roths, to Roth accounts. They realize, oh, I'm going to have these big tax bills in retirement. Maybe it's time to put some more money into Roth. The issue with that is, say you're in your early 60s, still working, still making retirement plan contributions, you're probably, if you are eligible to make traditional tax deferred contributions, you may be better off taking the tax break today, even if it doesn't mean you get as much into your Roth accounts. And the key point I would make there is post retirement, before those required minimum distributions kick in, which now is at age 73, you have a really nice window to consider taking steps to help get more into the Roth column. And the reason that's a really attractive time to do that is that you have more control over your income in those years. You're not getting a paycheck anymore. It's up to you to decide how much you're pulling from your portfolio. And you might be in a lower tax bracket in that post retirement, pre required minimum distribution period. So look at that window as a time to consider things like making conversions to Roth accounts, and get some tax advice here before you do that. You may do a series of conversions to Roth accounts. You may even accelerate your withdrawals from those traditional tax deferred accounts, and you're doing that in years when your tax bracket might be a little bit lower. So that's really the sweet spot, is post retirement, pre RMD is a great life stage to take advantage of some of those tax saving strategies.
That's really interesting. So yeah, you have to look at how that will affect your tax bracket, and as you said, you discuss it with your accountant. But I mean,
Definitely.
because as now with longevity, who knows how long we're going to be living, and
Right.
those accounts grow bigger and bigger, and the tax bill gets bigger and bigger.
It's a good,
It's a good
it's a
problem.
high class problem to
It's a
have,
high
but
class
yes,
problem. Yes. Yes, as they say, definitely a high class problem. So you mentioned women and their retirement plans, and of course, WISE is all about serving our community here. And women, you also mentioned this, of gender specific issues as related to retirement, that longevity issue, wage gaps, work gaps, divorce, widowhood. So how do women kind of overcome some of these obstacles if they're behind in their retirement saving, or even if they're not, to think about how to withdraw? Is it different if they're alone or dealing with these obstacles?
well, women do have those extra years of longevity on their side. And one thing that we notice when we look at the data is that women have historically invested a bit more conservatively than
Yes,
men. I've talked to Jean Chatzky, who you probably know,
yes, yes.
and she talks about when she talks to these groups of women, they keep talking about safety, not just in their portfolios, but in their cars. We tend to, and of course, this is a huge generalization. I'm sure there are risk takers in the
Oh, yeah,
audience
yeah,
too,
of
but
course.
we tend to, really like the safety features. The mismatch is if you've got that extra longevity, all else equal, that argues for you needing to take a little bit more risk. You need age appropriate risk in your portfolio. So certainly, as you're accumulating in your 20s, 30s, 40s, even in your 50s, 60s, having ample equity exposure in that portfolio is crucial. That even though the safety features, the pieces of our portfolios that stay stable in volatile markets, they're very attractive. We don't want to overdo them. So there's that to think about. Make sure you're taking an appropriate level of risk. And then another risk factor that I wanted to call out, Angela, is addressing long-term care risk.
Ah,
It's a particularly big consideration for women because of that longevity edge that we tend to be oftentimes caregivers for our male partners, and we outlive them. And so no one's around to care for us in that same way. So women are more likely to need paid long-term care than males. So make sure you have some type of a plan in place for that. So it might be insurance. It might be that you have an additional bucket, maybe a fourth bucket set aside that is your long-term care fund, where you are, if you're, just embarking on retirement, you'd want to have it pretty aggressively positioned, because chances are you wouldn't need it until the very end of your life. And then you're kind of right sizing that bucket based on what the data say about long-term care usage, which is that the average person needs long-term care for like 1.5 years or so, and the cost of care in the US is roughly $100,000 a year, but definitely more in big urban centers. And so you could use that to decide how much to set aside. But that is a big risk factor that I think people need to incorporate into their plans. And I find that this worry about long-term care, and many of us have experienced it with our families, with our parents, it hangs out there as this looming worry that keeps people from really enjoying the portfolios that they've managed to save. So my advice is make a plan for this, so it's not just this idea that, oh, maybe I'll have this giant balloon payment at the end of my retirement. That doesn't feel good as a risk factor. You need a plan.
so what about annuities in that plan? I know there's the annuities that kick in at, let's say, age 80 or 85. Are those something to look into?
I'm so glad you asked that, because yes, I think they are. But I would take pains to say that annuities are not universally good. In fact, many of them are reviled for good reason, that they are opaque, they're high cost. So you want to be very choosy if you're venturing into an annuity. But an annuity can be a really nice way to augment Social Security, where you're looking at how much you are getting from Social Security, and you want to try to line that up with those fixed costs that you expect to have in retirement, and it may not be enough. So if you need to shore up what you'll get from Social Security, that can help you determine how much to put into an annuity. And an annuity, I should say, is just an insurance contract where you are signing over a portion of your portfolio to an insurance company, and they're basically going to send it back to you as a stream of payments. And you might might say, well, what's to like about that? And the key benefit to an annuity is that it is a lifetime stream of payments. So it will last as long as you do, in a very simple annuity type. So it's similar to Social Security in that fashion. It's not backed by the government, of course, so you need to do your homework in terms of the credit worthiness or the financial stability of the insurance company. But I would tend to gravitate to the super simple annuity products. So a simple fixed immediate annuity or a deferred annuity, which you mentioned, Angela, which is the type of annuity that I might buy when I'm 65, and it wouldn't start paying me until I'm, say, age 85. So the insurance company would have my money for those 20 years. But the nice thing is that it would allow me to say, okay, I know for sure my portfolio will last for 20 years. After that, when I'm 85, I'm a little nervous about my portfolio's ability to last. That's where that deferred annuity would kick in and begin to provide you payments. And those can be kind of cost-effective products because they're not paying you today. The insurance company has your funds to invest over that time horizon until it starts making you payments. So they can be the amount that you have to put into it is lower than would be the case if you wanted it to start payments right away.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that sounds like something you should look into. And also for the fact that, the terms of this cash flow, that gives you a little cushion too, to say, well, if I start getting low in my portfolio, I have this to kick in at the end.
Exactly. And there's been some research actually on, when we're in retirement, we don't treat every source of income equally in terms of what we give ourselves permission to spend.
Right.
So Social Security feels a little bit like free money to a lot of us, or just we're comfortable spending that. Less so with our portfolio income. If I have to go into my portfolio and sell a chunk of it to meet my living expenses, that doesn't feel good. Whereas if people are receiving these paychecks from the annuity, it just gets deposited into their account. That feels a little bit more like Social Security. So
Yes.
part of this is a psychological challenge where you're switching on your spending after a lifetime of saving. And so I think annuities can be helpful in that context as well.
Yeah, little peace of mind.
Yeah.
Christine, I've heard you talk about seeking advice as you approach retirement, about your budget, a reality check from a financial planner. Now, even if you don't use one, what do you think that brings to the party?
Well, just a second set of eyes on your plan is the key thing. You may have blind spots. One point I would make is that a good financial planner would have very high powered software that he or she is using to help calibrate your tax rate over your whole retirement time horizon. And of course, this rests on a set of assumptions. Usually, will rest on whatever we know about tax rates. But the back of the envelope sorts of calculations just aren't enough when it comes to you're beginning to think about retirement, you're getting close to it. I think you probably do want to put some higher level calculations around the viability of your retirement plan. So there's that. I think there's the kind of a devil's advocate role that an advisor can play, where they can maybe bring into play some risk factors that you may not have considered. So a couple of different value adds that I think advisors can bring to the party at this life stage. And I would also just tell your audience, Angela, that it's not necessarily the one model where you're paying a percentage of your assets year in and year out. That may be the right model for some people, but shop around, look at what you need from a planner. If you just kind of want that one time or maybe every 5 years review of your portfolio and your plan, then maybe paying hourly or on a per engagement basis is the way to go. But I'm not comfortable with most people DIYing their retirement. They need the advice of a professional, even if they're really good and competent in all of these areas. I think it's valuable to have another set of eyes on the plan.
Well, you bring up a lot of good points here. The software that we don't have, the projections of taxes and where that leaves us, the cash flow, and just the discipline of forcing ourselves to admit all the money that we're spending.
That, and also, you might have the counter where a good planner can give you some permission or peace of
Yes.
mind to like make that gift to a child to help him or her buy a first home or pay down student loans. Sometimes it might go in the opposite direction where the planner might say, do you want to leave this big bequest at the end of your life when your kids are likely to be in their 50s or 60s? Or do you want to think about doing it today when they're in their 20s? And I think most of us would say, let's do it when our kids are younger, where we can make those more impactful, even smaller gifts.
You bring up such a good point, the permission to spend and how if the funds are available, why not give them to the children while you can see their joy.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay. So we're getting. I can't see the Q&A box here. So, Casey, Joyce, do we have questions here?
Hi, it's Joyce. You can hear me okay?
Yes, yes, yes.
Great. Okay, wonderful. Yes, we do have a couple of questions. The first one is, if you have a pension in retirement, is it okay to invest a greater amount of the portfolio in equities?
I love that question, Joyce, and thank you. Absolutely. So the basic steps that I would take would be to start with my anticipated spending, try to get my arms around that, subtract out any money that I have coming to me from a pension, from Social Security. If I've purchased an annuity, I'm subtracting that out. And then I'm backing into the asset allocation. So if I'm getting a bigger share of my household cash flow needs from those non-portfolio income sources, by all means, that should allow for a higher allocation to stocks. But here, comfort level comes into play as well. If I'm one of those people who is sleepless when the market is volatile, I should, for one thing, try to put those fears aside, but I would put a little bit more weight on a conservative portfolio, even if the math would argue for me having a very aggressively positioned portfolio. But the pension should absolutely figure in and should, in most cases, allow someone to have a heavier equity weighting. But I think you do want to think about your anticipated, beyond those kind of basic spending needs. You'd want to think about, well, will I be taking any big trips or doing lifetime giving sooner? You'd want to take those sorts of factors into account too.
Mm, got it. Great. Another question that seems to, I think, fit in with that as well. Is there a specific portfolio for a 61-year-old single woman that recently retired? And it sounds like it would be similar to what you just said about checking into your spending, but certainly if you want to make any further comments on that one.
Sure. So someone who's just over 60, a point I would make here is put in place a plan that would allow you to absorb a shock. So, one shock, and not to scare anyone, but people tend to not be great judges of when they might retire. That oftentimes we're pushed out of the workforce for any number of reasons that we can't have anticipated, whether it's health conditions, our spouse, health condition, job loss. We know ageism is an issue in our culture. So, I would start building a portfolio that looks a lot like an in retirement portfolio. Once I've crossed over the age 60 mark, I would start putting in place some of those more conservative constituents to help provide me with that buffer in case I am forced out of the workforce maybe earlier than I might have wished. So I would start adding, maybe not a lot of cash at that point, but certainly start adding short-term bonds. I would start adding some of that inflation insulation in the form of TIPS and I bonds. I would build out my allocation to core bonds as well.
Great. A few more questions, if we can. If someone is retiring long before Medicare, example, well before 60, what do you recommend for healthcare options?
This is a tough question, Joyce, and I have to say it takes me a little bit outside of my bailiwick. One risk factor, in fact, I was just talking to a colleague the other day who is close to retirement, and I think he just turned 60, and his wife is going to continue to work because they're nervous about this very thing. Some of the premiums that we've seen in the Affordable Care exchanges have elevated quite a bit recently. So you definitely want to build that into your budget. I know there are brokers who work with people at this life stage to help them find good plans on the exchanges, but definitely do your homework if you're an early retiree pre-Medicare to factor in the role of those higher healthcare costs in the intervening years until you're Medicare eligible. It's a big issue, unfortunately.
Great. Two more questions if we can. One is for someone who does not work for a corporation where they have a 401k plan, for example, they work on their own perhaps or some other type of job. What would you suggest for someone like that?
So it depends on the context in which they work, but one vehicle that's available for all of us would be an IRA. So assuming you have any kind of earned income, you can make an IRA contribution. So start there. And then you may have other opportunities depending on how you work. So a SEP IRA may be available to many people who are self-employed. A solo 401k is another option to investigate. Also, if you are covered by a high deductible healthcare plan, I would use a health savings account. And I think that can also be a nice kind of backdoor retirement savings vehicle. So the way that I've been using my health savings account is that I fund it every year up to the max and I don't spend from it, even though the original intent of HSAs was that it was meant to be kind of a pay as you go, pay those out of pocket healthcare costs. I use it as an ancillary retirement savings vehicle, and I invested in long-term investments. And the idea is that it's a component of my retirement plan, so I can use it for any healthcare costs when I'm retired, and those funds will go in on a tax-free basis, they'll compound on a tax-free basis, and they'll come out on a tax-free basis. And then finally, I would call out just a nice taxable brokerage account can be a phenomenal tool for whether you're self-employed or you're not self-employed, an ancillary retirement savings vehicle where you are investing in tax efficient investments. So usually on the equity side, you'd want index funds and exchange traded funds. You might have a little bit of fixed income exposure, but if you're a higher income person, you're leaning more into municipal bonds. But you can really run that portfolio quite tax efficiently if you're careful about what you put in there. So I wouldn't hesitate to tell anyone to use that taxable brokerage account. And the nice thing about it is that it's super flexible. So there's no one telling you that there are age limits around when you can pull the money out. You don't have to take the money out on any preset schedule, so there are no required minimum distributions or anything like that. And you can put as much as you want into it. So those are some of the main things that I would have in the toolkit if I were a self-employed worker.
Terrific. I have one last question here, if we can, from Joanna. Um, she's in her late 20s. For those that are starting up, where would be the best place to start looking for a good financial advisor and or accountant to start creating her portfolio?
So there are some great networks that are geared toward younger investors. So one I would call out is called XY Planning Network that is geared toward younger investors. Those are mostly advisors who I believe work on a subscription basis. So that's one network to check out. Another one for people who want to pay on a fee only basis is called Advice Only Network. And that's another group of fee only advisors who do not charge based on the size of your portfolio. They don't care about the size of your portfolio, which is nice when you're just starting out because you wouldn't be able to meet the thresholds that a lot of advisors use. So those are a couple that I would call out. There's also a planning group called Measure Twice Financial Planners that is, I believe, geared toward younger accumulators. So that's just a short list of some places to look for good quality fee-only advisors.
Joyce, any more questions here?
There actually is one question.
Yeah, we have time. We have time.
Okay, super. This came in from Misty. How soon after retirement should we begin converting an employer-sponsored 401k IRA to a Roth?
So it's not a one size fits all answer, Misty. Here's a spot where when Angela and I were talking about the reasons to get some financial planning guidance, or at least guidance from maybe a CPA, here's a spot to get some customized advice, because it's impossible to say when to start converting and how much to start converting. But oftentimes those years post-retirement are a good time to consider doing so. While you're still working and earning a paycheck, not so much. Those tend to be the high earnings years. Even though you might want to get more over into the Roth column, I would probably wait until retirement and until I had a little bit more control over my taxable income.
I have no more questions
Well,
here,
first, I want to
Angela.
thank Joyce.
Thank
Joyce, I didn't introduce you here. She is one of our
Oh,
most knowledgeable board members. So thank you, Joyce. I mean, she's a financial planner herself, so ideally fits this role. So we have a couple of more minutes. So, Christine, I had a question about dividend stocks.
Good.
Didn't talk about that. So I did hear once some right person say, well, instead of an annuity, why don't you just buy dividend stocks because you get the dividends? What is your feeling about dividend stocks in a portfolio in retirement?
So that seems like an apples to oranges comparison, if you ask me, because as we talked about, the annuity would have that lifetime income stream, which you may get from your dividend paying stocks. I will say, when I think about the things I've changed my mind about, one of them is that it's not that I didn't like dividend paying stocks. I like them as well as the next person, but I had observed that some retirees especially seem to have sort of an irrational preference for dividends. And when I look at it, I'm like, well, your portfolio doesn't know whether you're spending your dividend income or whether you're spending a portion of something that has appreciated a lot. But I think in talking to retirees more, I understand why they like dividends, because it's simply, if an investment I have is going to make regular deposits into my account as a dividend paying stock or fund would, that's just easier than going into it and having to sell a chunk of it to help meet my living expenses. So I actually don't mind the idea of retirees having an equity portfolio that has a little bit of a tilt toward dividend paying stocks, provided they're high quality dividend paying stocks and the retiree is not really bending over backward in an effort to have a high income from that portfolio. But one point I would make is that it shouldn't supplant that safe portfolio. I think you probably need both. That even if your equity portfolio is delivering you a nice share of the income that you expect to need, you still do need those safer assets to draw upon. And I would go into the Wayback Machine and remind people that we had that period from 2007 through 2009 when dividend paying stocks were a real source of pain for investors, because Bank stocks at that time were some of the main dividend payers, and of course, bank stocks were at the epicenter of the financial crisis. So a lot of people who had been using dividend-paying stocks saw their dividends dwindle quite substantially during that period. So you do want some safer assets that you could draw upon in case something happened to some of the dividend payers in your portfolio. So I would say it's not either or. It's not either dividend paying stocks or bonds. It's probably a combination of both.
Yeah, I've often heard, I love this saying, that diversification is the only free lunch in investing.
It's true. It's true. I think that was Harry Markowitz. If I
yes,
had,
yeah, it is recounted, and it is true. Yeah,
it's true.
So, okay, Christine, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to do this and for help us. Now we know that we can build a portfolio that hopefully will give us cash flow through retirement. We won't say at the end of retirement, we'll leave that out. Will last us. And also the whole discussion about lifestyle in retirement. That's such an important thing that you are one of the key advocates for, to focus on that. So now we have two things to focus for in our reality check. So, okay, what would be one, two takeaways that you'd like to leave with our listeners?
So a key one is to put it all on autopilot. We're all busy. So whether you are still in accumulation mode or you're someone who is getting close to retirement or in retirement, whatever you can do to automate these things, automate your contributions if you're still contributing, automate the money coming out of your portfolio if you're getting into drawdown mode. Make it easy on yourself so that you're not having to jump through hoops to make sure that things are running the way that they should. So I would start there, and then I would also get some good quality advice. And I know we talked about the value of good quality advice, but I had spent my career really being a huge proponent of DIY type investing, and I'm still a big member of the Bogleheads community, which is people who are just spreadsheet geeks, very dedicated to doing their own portfolio plans, but even they need help. And especially as we age, I think about my parents. My dad had been the main investment manager in my family's household, and my dad experienced cognitive decline. And I did this for my day job, so was able to step in and help my parents. But many people don't have that really great backup plan in place, and that's where some financial help can come into play. So you can do a lot of it yourself. You can be a great consumer and not overconsume and not overpay for financial advice, but everyone needs some kind of a backup.
Yeah, and as you say, keep it simple is part of that. Helps
Absolutely.
Helps a lot. So I urge, first of all, thank you to all of our listeners. Thank you for joining us. And I hope you'll take all of this advice and put it into play, consider it. And also go to our website, wiseinvestors.org. You'll see Christine's webinar from a few months ago about the non-financial aspects, and take a look at all the books that she's written. They're all wonderful. And give a lot of guidance. So, and we're all responsible for our own financial lives. We should not advocate to others, not husbands, not friends, not even advisors. You need to know what you own in your portfolio and make sure that you have some knowledge. And that's what WISE is all about. So, Christine, we can't thank you enough. And we'll have you back. We're going to think of another, maybe we'll put everything together next time. But thank you so much.
It's been my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela.